you're going to have a successful business, product development never ends. You launch it, but you're launching it all the time.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Mars Discovery District and welcome back to Entrepreneurship 101. My name is Gina Leslie. I manage the Entrepreneurship and Innovation series here at Mars, and we are very glad to have Chris Eben, who is the managing partner of the Working Group, speaking on product development. Before I introduce Chris, we do have a few housekeeping tips and a few announcements. A warm welcome, of course, to our webcast participants and our satellite center partners who are joining us literally from all over Canada, in some cases other countries across the world. And we've definitely expanded past Ontario over the last 10 years. So we're very, very excited about that. If you are interested in lecture resources after this lecture, everything will be available on the Mars website by Monday morning, Monday afternoon. So the slides, a post-lecture blog, as well as the video and related articles around product development will all be available on the Mars website by Monday. This evening, you would have come through quite a bit of excitement in the atrium. We have the Techno Showcase, which is led by the Impact Center from University of Toronto. And Techno is the Impact Center's elite entrepreneurship training program for scientists and engineers who are serious about building technology-based companies. I think the timing is really, really very convenient. Given that Chris is speaking about product development, it will give you a chance. They were very generous in allowing us to extend the time, the Techno Showcase time, to 8 o'clock, so that all of you who are here have an opportunity to see some of the products that are on display, to speak to some of the students that are participating, and of course to apply some of what you would have heard, some of what you will hear from Chris's lecture to what you hear in the atrium from the students and the participants who are displaying. Next week's lecture is actually a panel discussion within our Meet the Entrepreneurs mini-series in Entrepreneurship 101. Meet the Entrepreneurs allows you to hear from startups and early-stage entrepreneurs and to get a sense of what they've done to get where they are in the journey. Again, they're very early stage, but they still have a lot of learnings and a lot of important feedback that might be useful for some of you who are on the journey yourselves, whether getting started or a little bit farther along. It's going to be moderated by Jared Walker, who is the managing editor of socialfinance.ca. And he's also the communications associate for our Center for Impact Investing here at Mars. And we'll have 3 of our startups from the Mars community here speaking to their experience and their journey thus far. So it's going to be pretty exciting. It will also give you a chance to do a lot more networking. We'll have hot and cold beverages at the end of the evening. It goes for about an hour and a half, and it gives you a bit more time to ask questions of the panelists and of the moderator, and to just to network with your peers. Who knows, you might meet the next co-founder for your startup in the room. So we do encourage you to attend that and to learn a little bit more about social innovation, which is going to be the focus that evening. I would like to move on to something very, very exciting. It's early days, and for those of you who are familiar with Entrepreneurship 101, with the entire program, you know that at the end of the year, we have our major party, which is also our business pitch competition called the Upstart Competition. And I'm very happy to launch, in many respects, the Upstart Competition this evening. We begin the process very early to give all of you who are interested in participating enough time to prep for the competition, which is next year, May, so the 20th of May next year. Upstart is, again, as I mentioned, our business pitch competition, which culminates Entrepreneurship 101. It is sponsored by, last year it was sponsored by KPMG very generously, and we had a cash prize of $15,000 and then an in-kind prize package, which was the equivalent to about $25,000, and that was sponsored by several of our service providers here at Mars. We had 12 teams last year. Typically, we try to whittle the number down to about 10 finalists, but last year we had really strong applicants, really strong teams, and we had a difficult time bringing it down to just 10. So we had 12 teams last year, and each had about 8 minutes to pitch. On average, though, it's 10 teams and 10 minutes of pitching time. And at the end, we announce the winners at the end during the reception. Of course, we allow people who come in just to participate to share their own opinion and their views on who the winner should be through our People's Choice Award. So it's very participatory. We have our corporate sponsors in the room, people, the teams, the family members and friends of the teammates come in to support them. We have a lot of Martians who are in the space. Occasionally, we have investors in the space. And whether or not a team wins, it's very much a springboard for the participating teams to move on to other things. We've seen a lot of the teams coming through the competition do amazing things even after, whether or not they win the competition. To be eligible for the Upstart competition, you need to have, of course, you have to be enrolled in Entrepreneurship 101, meaning you have to have registered, but you also need to have attended at least 20 of the 30 lectures, or 60% of the lectures. And that can be in person, which is the case for many of you here, or by webcast, or a combination of both. But as long as you've met that 20 out of 30 criteria, you're fine. And in order to do that, it means if you're participating in person, make sure you check in at the front door once you're here every lecture. If you're participating by webcast, we automatically track that, so you don't have to worry too much about it. You must be there, you can participate, you can submit your application remotely, of course, by email, and go through a lot of the meeting with the advisors remotely as well. But for the actual day of the pitch competition, you need to be in the room, you need to be present. So that covers in terms of attendance, eligibility for attendance. Your venture or your business idea should also fall within one of 3 Mars Venture Services areas. So information and communications technology, clean tech, or health. And if your business is in the social innovation space, but it also falls within one of these 3 areas, you're very much welcome to apply. Social innovation is something that we're putting a bit more emphasis on here at Mars. And of course, in terms of financing, to level the playing field to make it fair for everybody who's participating, it's important that your business has not received more than $100,000 in investment money or earned more than $100,000 in revenue since the time of inception. In terms of the stages of the competition, the first stage in our minds is the toolkit workshop, and that begins the application for participating in the workshops is November 20th. So you have about 2 weeks to give it some thought and to put the application in. 2 weeks is quite a bit of time. The application is not very extensive. It's not required, participating in the workshops is not required for the competition, but we do highly recommend it. We found that a lot of the teams that apply, once they go through the workshops, they come out a lot stronger at the end. Their applications, their executive summaries are a lot stronger. So that, and I'll speak to the details of the workshops a little bit later. In terms of competition entry, again, the application deadline, the executive summary is required by the end of January next year, so January 30th. I know it seems a ways away, but it is a very competitive process. Last year, we had about a 30% increase in applications. So we had 65 applications, and we had to bring that number down to 25, and then finally to 10. So it is very competitive. It's important, I think, to start sooner than later. And you can submit that via email to entrepreneurship101@marsdd.com. It will, a little bit later in the process, you get a chance to meet with advisors, or some of our advisors here at Mars, once you've been selected for the second stage, so the top 20 to 25 teams. And then a little bit later down, about 68 weeks before the actual competition date, you meet with the top 10 teams, meet with and work with our advisors here, perfecting their business pitch and perfecting the business plan. And of course, on 20th of May, that is the big day. That's the actual competition day, and we announce the winner that very evening. So the criteria for judging, just to give you a sense of what's required and what we're looking for. Of course, there's a lot more detail underneath all of this, and we'll have lots of this available on the Mars website, but also throughout the process once you've been selected to go on to the finals. The criteria for judging is, are you able to clearly articulate your value proposition? We also want to make sure that you understand that there is demand for what you're putting forward in the market, and that you have a sustainable business model, whether or not it's a social venture. In the case of a social venture, you need to be able to demonstrate that there is impact. You also should be able to demonstrate that your company is differentiated in the market. In Thailand, I learned a phrase in Thailand called same, but different. In this case, it shouldn't be same, but different. It needs to be very different. So you need to be thinking about how it's differentiated enough so that you can claim some amount of intellectual capital. And of course, just in general, your presentation skills need to be fairly strong. That's something that you need to work on. It needs to be a compelling delivery so that the judges and the audience in some respects can relate to what you're saying and buy into it. And at the end of the day, you should be able to answer the question, is this compelling and would I invest in my own idea? So again, you have about 3 months to give it some thought and to put the application process together. And the workshop application deadline is the 20th of November. If you need more information on the competition, we have flyers at the registration desk and FAQ sheets about that, and you can also refer to the webpage for the Upstart competition. The Entrepreneurs Toolkit workshop for Upstart is again, highly recommended by us. We think it's a really great value in terms of time spent investing in the workshops. Our toolkit workshops are experiential, hands-on programs facilitated by experienced entrepreneurs, and they offer early-stage ventures tools, mentoring, and peer feedback to solve specific problems and develop essential business components for their ventures. So it starts with perfecting your pitch. Last year, we actually had the pitching session at the very end, and we've decided to shift it to the beginning because there were lots of questions and lots of concerns about just the timing. We've also brought the timing forward a little bit and started a bit earlier to give interested participants enough time to think through everything that they're learning, to process the information, enough time to do customer discovery, and of course, a little bit of extra time between when the workshops end and when the actual application is due. So you have enough time to craft your executive summary based on what you've learned. So it's very intensive, but very, very worth it. And a lot of people have a lot of fun. Again, the participants coming through the Upstart competition, whether or not they win the competition, it's very much a springboard into the next level for them, and it drives a lot of growth for their companies. I've seen a lot of companies at Mars who haven't won the competition, who either get accepted to one of our accelerator programs, or they become accepted as a Mars client. And of course, for some of them, there's a lot of investor interest. All right, so I'm going to move on to the more exciting part of this evening and introduce Chris Eben, who is the managing partner for the working group. I was looking through Chris's bio and was so impressed I just had to highlight like the key pieces. I'll let him speak to the rest of the details. But he is a mentor, investor, and community event organizer. He's a tireless advocate for all things entrepreneurial, and I'm from looking at his bio, I could see that for sure. Chris helped to bring Startup Weekend to Canada and organizes the Toronto chapter of global pre-accelerator program Startup Next. He joined TWG The Working Group after 15 years in the enterprise software market, focused on business intelligence, analytics, and performance management. He has worked with both startups and large organizations and held roles in product management and client services, most recently as Director of Product Management at Actuate Corporation. He actually lived in San Francisco for 2 years, was it? During the rise and fall of the first internet bubble, before moving to London to establish his company's operations in Europe. And he completed his MBA at Kellogg and then returned to Toronto to join the working group as managing partner in 2011. He is the founding partner of Postage App, which is the easiest way to send email from web apps, and is an investor in a growing list of startups through TWG Acceleration Partners, which includes Nudge Rewards, Organics Live, and ShopLocket. So while Chris is transitioning onto the stage, I'd like each of you to take a little bit of time and introduce yourself to the person who's next to you and answer the question, what is the best product you've ever bought? Thank you.
Thanks, Gina, for the introduction, and thanks to Mars and Entrepreneurship 101 for having me come talk about, I think, a pretty challenging part of the process and part of the journey of entrepreneurship. Gina gave the introduction. For me, I'm with the working group. We design and build digital products. We do this for quite a variety of different clients. We're about 50 people right now based here in Toronto. We have a small office in New York, and we have clients throughout North America. And maybe what's somewhat unique about our business is we have clients that span, big brands like TSN, Rogers, Sobeys, these kind of companies. But our roots are actually more in the startup community with entrepreneurs. We feel like we're entrepreneurs, and we've always worked with startups. And actually, most recently, in the last few years, we've actually taken the work we were doing with startups to the point that we're actually investing in a number of those startups as well. So we actually have about 15 different companies in our portfolio. A few of them are up on the screen. ShopLocket, you might know of, was recently acquired. Nudge Rewards came through the kind of Mars world. In fact, has the Mars IAF as one of its founding investors, and a number of other interesting startups at different stages in their life cycle. So we'd like to think that we also know how to kind of help move these businesses along from a product development perspective, because that's really what we're ideally experts in, and hopefully why I'm here to talk to you guys about this topic. So today's topic, product development 101. It's kind of a scary topic to me because it's like, God, that's so many different things. And my background is in digital products. I'm curious, from the audience, just through show of hands, like first off, how many of you are at the stage where you're doing some sort of product development for your startup? Okay, so maybe a third. And how many of those are on digital products? Okay, good. I'm not going to be talking to people that are building products that I have no idea how to build, like consumer packaged goods products, or even getting into the hardware space. It's challenging. So we want to look at like what does product development mean to an entrepreneur, and like try to dissect this really large problem. And I'll start to get into what I think is critical to this and to all of you as entrepreneurs, or as what I call sometimes wantrepreneurs. You're at that stage, you want to be an entrepreneur, which is awesome. I think that's why you should be here. It's not a bad word, it's a good thing. Or intrapreneurs, if you're more entrepreneurial but working inside a bigger organization. All of this stuff still applies. What I'm going to start focusing on is the role of the product manager in all of this, because that's really kind of the centerpiece of product development from my perspective and from TWG's perspective. And really, you want to take this information and figure out how to turn your ideas, your visions, your aspirations into reality through the product. So this is a good example here of a product you might know, Nest, well-known product out in the market right now. There's a lot of pieces to this. What is a good product? It's bringing all the pieces together and serving like a real need, solving a real problem for your customer, creating something with utility. What's interesting about this, and what I won't be able to talk too much about, is there's many components here. This is a piece of hardware. I don't know that much about how to develop hardware. Of course, there's a ton of software behind this, and almost everything now has that piece. So I hope that by giving you more of the digital software version of the product development story, I still provide you with some useful information. Often these days, the startup and entrepreneurial space are filled with largely digital businesses. So I'm hopeful that I can provide you with useful information in this regard. I'm trying to go off of two things. My things are not synchronized here, so forgive me if I'm a little bit all over the map on this. Product development, the creation, innovation, improvement, or enhancement of a new or existing product. That is a lot of stuff, and there's many different forms that can take. From complete greenfield product development, creating something absolutely new, to working on something that's more established and enhancing that, pivoting that, changing that in more minor ways. I think the key here is that you have to find some kind of process to take you through this, to take you through the product development cycle. And there are many, as you'll see as I get through the presentation. And the key point there is there always needs to be that process, and there needs to be kind of rigor and discipline to following that process. And that's really hard to do as an entrepreneur because you're usually doing a lot of different things at once. You might not have a background in that sense. You're coming at it from a different perspective. So you've got to you've got to really do the work to go and find what works for you, what ultimately works for your team, what makes sense for the product and the market that you're actually exploring. So this is meant to represent there's a lot of you in the room wearing many different hats, doing all sorts of different things. And that's what you want in a kind of entrepreneurial startup community. What I'm wondering here, I mean, hopefully you're all kind of following through this Entrepreneurship 101 program. And so I have to go on the assumption that you've done some work already and you've validated some of your assumptions, you've gone out, you've spoken to customers. How many of you are aware of lean startup methodologies, those sorts of things? That's going to be part of this discussion. So I'll talk a little bit to it, but I won't go into too much depth because I'm assuming that some of you have covered this already. And we'll talk about that kind of creation of the prototype, the MVP, minimum viable product. This all starts to speak to the concept of kind of iterating throughout the process and constantly learning. So all of this product development is not one piece of the entrepreneurial journey that you can kind of segregate. It's part of the entire process. And that's important to think about how you iterate throughout this. So if we go back quickly to one of the core principles of the lean startup, this is what I like to call kind of the new business model. It's not even that new anymore. It's been around for certainly a few years, pioneered by Eric Ries, the lean startup methodology. So this is the lean canvas, trying to put your kind of entire business down on one page so you can understand it. And I did my MBA, so I came from the world where you're supposed to put like 50-page documents together for your business plan. Well, that's, in my mind, kind of a load of crap these days. Those things don't serve anyone. Nobody reads them. Nobody understands them. They don't make any sense. And things move too quickly, so you can't iterate your 50-page business plan that often. But these are super effective because they're one page and they get everybody kind of thinking about the same things, and they're easy to take in and easy to change. So this is, to me, the beginning of the product development journey. First off, again, this is the work I'm going to assume you've done some of. If you're starting that journey yourselves, if you've actually found a problem out there that's worth solving. So on the left, you've got section number 1. What's the problem? State that in very, very basic terms. Then you start getting into, okay, well, what are some of the solutions to these problems? And a key piece here is number 2, the unique value proposition. If you want to have a business that's got any chance of success, if you want to create a product that's got any chance of success, then you need to create something that's got a unique value proposition at the end of the day. And it ties back to the problem and the solution that you're defining. Then you start going a little bit further, looking at things like, what is your unfair advantage in the marketplace? How are you going to make this defensible? Who are your customer segments? And this is an interesting one as well, because as you iterate through the early stages of building your product and building your business, you don't want to go after every customer segment at an early stage. You want to narrow this down to something that's attainable or reachable. You might look at your product and see this grand vision for how many different types of people it can actually reach, but you can't go after all of that at once because presumably you've got limited resources at the beginning. So that's an important one to look at. Channels is looking at kind of how are you going to reach those customer segments ultimately. In my case, it's often through web and mobile technologies. In other cases, it's going to be through devices like the Nest and how do you get that to them? What distribution channels, partnerships, those sorts of things. Key metrics is another piece, and these are just general concepts on entrepreneurship. You really need to be measuring what you do and understanding results, not just assuming, because it's very easy to kind of pat yourself on your own back and not back that up with any kind of meaningful data that shows that you're moving in the right direction. And then at the bottom are kind of more basic stuff, like what's your cost structure? You need to understand obviously what your cost structure is and how you're going to make money. Not basic. It's hard to come up with a business model for a lot of things, but really it's the top part of this model that's meant to kind of guide you through that iterative approach. And I always expect to see this in the life of an early stage startup to change many, many times and keep iterating through this. So one piece of this, is what I'm trying to talk about around iteration is just moving from that initial idea to some level of building, and you're trying to minimize how much you're building early on as you validate your idea. But you have to do some of that. So, the lean startup methodology is built and comes from concepts that come from Toyota from, 30, 40 years ago, manufacturing processes that were meant to kind of reduce waste in the manufacturing process. That's started to translate as people like Eric Ries and others have taken these approaches and modified them for startups in today's day and age. It's around building, without too much waste early on and measuring what you've done. So getting it in front of customers early, not taking 2 years to build a product, then putting it out in front of the market and finding that nobody wants it. It's not quite right. So build little pieces. This is where MVP, minimum viable product, makes a lot of sense. Measure that, collect the data, learn from it, and then go around the loop again. So that's the iterative model that needs to take place here. And it's different for everyone. Every industry has a different model that makes sense, or how short or how long that cycle is different industry to industry. So as I said before, I think you have to kind of put this, if you haven't done this already, you need to wear the hat of the product manager in a startup. If you're the founder, or if you're an early employee in a startup and you're entrepreneurial, then you need to have the mindset of a product manager. And that, again, that's different in all sorts of different industries. I came from a traditional product management background coming out of Silicon Valley, which interestingly is kind of different than product management here in Toronto. There's not as much of an established kind of culture around product management here in Toronto, so it's kind of a new, more nascent skill set here. Lots of talented people, but they don't necessarily call themselves product managers. Silicon Valley, every software company has teams of product managers and a kind of a very specific process and approach for how to get the job done. I don't care that much about kind of the labels and the approach for that, but you have to kind of see what a product manager is and what they should be doing and how they kind of fit into a business. So this is a picture of Tom. He is our director of product management at the Working Group. And I'll kind of tell you a little bit about what he does, and hopefully that describes kind of the importance of this in the product development life cycle. I think product managers sit at the center of every organization, frankly, that has products. And all organizations, at least that make money, do have products for the most part. And I think this, for me, my personal experience with this, product management is what actually allowed me to kind of feel comfortable going into the world of entrepreneurship. I came from that background. Because you sit at the center of your organization, you touch everything. You touch your customers, you touch sales, you touch marketing, you touch development, you touch manufacturing if you're in that space. All those pieces come together, so you actually learn how everything works. So for me, I was able to take that and say, okay, I actually feel comfortable running a business now. I think I've seen enough about how all of this works, and I actually went from doing product management into pure sales and marketing, which is largely what I do now. Because I'd been exposed to that so much through kind of sitting at the center of a big software organization. So again, a very important thing, lots of information online to read about product management, the different skills that are required for that, and the mindset you need to use. So the product manager also ultimately turns the idea into actual milestones and executes. It's all about starting to execute this. Sometimes the vision comes from someone else. It comes from that founder. I think those two things are ultimately the same early on, but over time, as a team grows, CEO, the founding team, builds and brings on other product managers, and the product managers have to kind of translate the vision from wherever it's coming from. It could be your own vision, it could be someone else's vision. You have to translate that into tangible kind of steps for execution to build. I see this kind of concept of product management at the center. Like, look at all these different things. Your product manager, founder is coordinating all these different inputs and learnings that help you define where you're going to take your product. So this matters at the beginning, but it also matters throughout, because you need to be learning from your product out in the marketplace all the time. You have to be maintaining it, building more, taking it different directions. And there's so much information now, compared to 5 years ago, what you can actually find when you think of the data side of things, the data that you can collect around how your customers use the product, how the customers that you want to have as customers but aren't there yet are using other things. testing that you can do, A/B testing, the concept of kind of using two versions of the same product or a portion of it, so you can see if somebody likes the A version or the B version and how that kind of translates in terms of effectiveness, market research, analytics, segmentation. So as much as I don't, I stand up here as someone who did an MBA, I don't always promote that, and it's not something that's always considered kind of a popular path in the tech and startup world these days, but it's a great kind of learning experience for product management because you get that holistic kind of view, certainly on the marketing and strategy side of things. And then if you've got any kind of a technical background to go with that, you mash those things up together, you've got a pretty good profile to work as a product manager effectively. So once as the kind of coordinator of all those inputs and understanding that stuff, then you've got to move into the concept of kind of putting your team together to start to execute. And some of you might have seen this little graphic before, a very, very basic graphic. Obviously, there's much more complexity and reality behind this, but it doesn't need to be that complex when you think of the early days of your startup or your entrepreneurial journey. There's not going to be that many of you. You need somebody that can execute on kind of the user experience part of this product. You've got somebody that needs to execute on the technology, writing code if that's what it is, creating switches and so on from a kind of more manufacturing perspective. And then the business person that's like very holistic, understanding all these, if it's the sales piece, if it's the operational side of the business. And the product manager needs to have some of all of that. It needs to sit in the middle. And that you might be one of those people as well, but you're also doing product management, or you might be kind of isolated and bringing those people together. But this is kind of the beginning of putting your team together to start executing on an actual product. So this is where it gets super complicated and not something that, every one of these models that you see here are things that I could probably talk about for a couple of hours each at least. These are training programs, courses. These are methodologies that are applied to the concept of product development. And I'm just going to talk about them kind of at a high level and then focus in on the stuff that I understand, because some of these I haven't worked with, I don't even know them in detail. But the main piece I want to tell, and it's kind of the evolution of where this stuff has gone, is the concept of a waterfall approach, which is represented kind of in the top left up here, where everything kind of goes in stages, starting with like building out your requirements, doing your analysis, figuring out what it is you want to build. Then you kind of hand that off to another team and they do the design piece. And then they hand that off to another team who codes up that design. Then you hand that off and you test it, you have to maintain it, and you throw it out to market. Now this was the way that all software in particular, but a lot of products were built for years and years, and it just creates a ton of shitty products. Because as you can imagine, especially when you get into like big products, that process can take years, and everything's changed by the time you get to the end of it. Now, of course, these are huge generalizations. It doesn't mean this never worked. It works in some cases, but it usually works by kind of like the sheer force of skill and quality of the people that are doing it, not because the process, the methodology was right. It was never right, as far as I'm concerned, having experienced both. Now, over here on the far right is the agile development process, and that's what that I adhere to, what TWG adheres to, and frankly, what any kind of up-to-date company these days that's doing software development at least adheres to, which recognizes that kind of iterative process and breaks things into much smaller pieces. Down at the bottom here, you've got kind of another version of waterfall, which is phase gate process. You've got a spiral approach, which again is more iterative. There's the V model at the top. So you can go online, you can read tons of stuff. There's courses, you can spend thousands of dollars on courses on this stuff. The key point is there are different models that work for different industries, for different types of products. And you have to find what makes sense for yours, but you have to think about that mindset of iterating as much as possible. And that's not possible for every type of product, absolutely, but I haven't really come across one that it doesn't make sense for. So pick what's best for your team, for your product, for you. Sometimes it's down to the skill sets as well. Who's worked following what type of methodology? You have to consider that stuff as well. A good example where you have to consider things differently. Like how we build web and mobile apps is probably quite different from how you'd build kind of a medical device. So the concept of iterating quickly and putting things out in the market to test them out quickly, I don't think that works when you're creating I can't even say the word defibrillator. That you probably want to make sure it's tested really well before you put it out in the market. I don't know what MVP for that kind of product is quite different from the kinds I'm used to launching. So again, I don't stand up here and pretend to know exactly how you do this in every different industry, but there's probably ways that you could iterate on this internally with dummies and all sorts of different test cases, getting out there, speaking to customers, understanding that, not going away for 2 years, not speaking to anyone, following this kind of waterfall process to get there. So moving into more kind of how we do things, another concept that I think makes a lot of sense but doesn't always get followed is this simple model of building things in pieces that actually work and provide value along the way. So I really like this diagram or this visual because it's simple for everyone to understand. And it's so easy to go down the path of saying, okay, we'll build the first wheel, then we'll build the axle and the other wheel, and then eventually we'll have a car. Well, that's going to take you a long time, and you're not going to learn anything until you get that car out to market. If you build the skateboard first and somebody rides it, and you learn more about your customer in that sense, and then you're building and enhancing on that, and you're getting new customer types, you're getting new market opportunities in doing that. But the concept is you need to get stuff out to market. And this is most important as an entrepreneur because your resources are scarce all the time. And if it takes you too long and you get it wrong, then you're done. And that's it. If you do it in small increments and you get stuff out there, you will be wrong, but you'll be able to adjust your course and you'll make changes to that. And that has to be built into the model and the process that you follow along the way. So I'll just kind of simply walk you through our model for this, again, which is an agile model, and it's not complicated, and hopefully it makes sense. And then I think I'll ideally leave a good amount of time for some questions, and then you guys can go out and talk to other startups out there. So the first process here, simple model doesn't really show the iteration, but the iteration is happening throughout here. Starting with the first piece, this kind of goes back to what we talked about initially with the lean canvas. You've got to get your kind of problem and your opportunity straight. For me, that's kind of the sales process because we're a service company for the most part. So I'm out there talking to clients, finding out where their problems are, what opportunities they want to explore. For you, it's looking at some market opportunity, some problem that's near and dear to you that you want to solve and build a product around. So we go back to the lean canvas, we define what that actually is. We already talked about this, so I'll skip by it. Then it's about, this is when kind of product management becomes really critical, and you need to start assembling the team to execute and put a plan around what that actual product is based on the what you've defined in your lean canvas and so on. What are the problems you're trying to solve? What are the market opportunities you're looking for? What do you need on your team? What are the right skill sets? How do you bring that stuff together? So that brings us back to this model of bringing those people together, being in the middle of this. And it's not just bringing the people together, it's putting the process and the tools in place to make this work. So from practical perspective, as we get through this, I'll give you some ideas on tools. Again, it's very software and kind of digitally focused, but I think that's probably going to be relevant for a lot of you. So now you get into like a core principle of product management and product development, which is building out your product roadmap and then ultimately creating a backlog. And I'll start explaining what this actually means. So the product roadmap is really kind of the higher level piece, capturing like everything. It's got to be tied very closely to the vision, but it's starting to get a little bit, a level deeper, a level of more depth than your vision, and it actually kind of maps out where you think this product's going to go over the next. I like to look at it in kind of the next year, the next kind of 18 to 24 months, and then 5 years out. You know that those longer term views are likely going to change dramatically, but it gives you something to work towards and gives you some guidance and make sure that you're building something that's got kind of potentially a sustainable future to it and more of a vision tied to it. And then from that, you're looking at kind of what you need to execute on in the short term, the 1-year plan, even the 3-month or the 6-month plan around that. And for that, you need to start building a backlog, and that gets into kind of a much more granular level of detail around what you're going to actually build. In the agile and kind of Scrum world that we come from, you start building kind of user stories. You break that right down. The user needs to be able to do X. And that's kind of a piece of work that somebody can actually do. And then you're kind of constantly ordering that and prioritizing that, and that's your backlog, and that's what you work from ultimately. And there's, again, like everything else here, there's a million different ways to look at this. The roadmap view, there's tools that are specifically built around giving you visuals for your roadmap. You can use Keynote, you can use Google Docs, spreadsheets, all this stuff. You don't have to worry too much about that, but there's lots of resources out there to help you build a roadmap and visualize that roadmap and then communicate it to the team that you've put together, so everybody's working on the same thing in the right direction. You're not kind of going in opposite directions to each other. Then, like I said, getting down into the backlog piece, the kind of the more tactical aspect of this, there are tons of different tools for this. A good tool right now is called Trello. Great online tool. It's free. And you could basically take this, and the concept now, once you have a backlog build, is how do you move things through the backlog. And I don't know if you can see the titles up here, but you kind of have your backlog on the left here, and then you move them through, like what's coming up next? What am I actually working on right now? I've worked on it, I'm passing it off, it's going into QA, quality assurance, it's ready, and then you kind of start that cycle again. People do this in all sorts of ways. There's obviously tools like that with software, but great ways to do this as well, just sticky notes and boards. And a big part of that is to make sure that everybody can see this and everybody can share that and everybody's working on it together. A big principle of kind of the agile method here is that communication and transparency with the team is absolutely critical. So from that, we move into this is something we're working on right now at TWG, this concept of a sprint zero. And I guess, just so I'm not using terms that don't make sense to you, sprints, which I think I get into a little bit later, so maybe it's a bit backwards here, but you break everything into these small sprints of work. And this is the concept of being able to iterate and not doing too much at the beginning and not learning from what you're doing. So you break it into small sprints. In software, you can use 1-week sprints, 2-week sprints, 3-week sprints, and they have a beginning and an end, and you want to reevaluate everything at the end of that sprint, kind of reprioritize your backlog based on what you learned from that first sprint. So we have this concept of a sprint zero now, which is tied really to that roadmap and backlog definition that says, okay, well, what are we building here? And let's get some kind of core principles dealt with before we start actively building everything. In the case of software, a lot of that comes down to kind of design principles. What are the designs that are inspiring us out there? What are the user experiences that work in our space? Understanding the kind of user personas, who you're targeting with the product, those sorts of things. So we do a lot of that work in the sprint zero, which sets you up for ideally a kind of a more efficient and better approach as you move through the other sprints in the model. So like I said, a sprint has kind of a clearly defined start and finish to it, and it's short. Maybe these guys are running 800 meters, but I'd like to say it's more like a 100-meter sprint. It's short, it's quick, and then it ends, and you kind of move on, and you get back. Sorry, I'm looking at my slides here. So yes, this is the 100-meter sprint, and then you iterate through this. So each sprint becomes an iteration, and along the way, you're releasing. You're putting it out there to market. You're learning from it. Back to that kind of iterative cycle that you've seen in a few different visuals here. So in each sprint, you're also, every project, you'll look at it and say, well, there's a defined number of sprints ideally for this. You're building working product that you can release in some form. It doesn't mean the full feature set is there, but it actually works. You could put it out into market. So we try to take that approach that even with our big clients, that you're actually breaking this up and releasing working product each step of the way. So you could effectively stop at any point and you've got something that works. With this also, you're kind of managing the concept of scope creep. So I think what Agile is trying to do here is recognize that you still need to find kind of periods where you just say, okay, good, we think we know what we're doing for this period of time, now do it. You actually need time to be efficient and work on it. And so the job of the product manager, the project managers, and so on is to still manage scope creep. So if you've got a 1-week sprint, then just let the engineers work on what you've defined for that 1 week. Don't interrupt them. Say, oh, I thought of this new feature, let's add that. Put that on the backlog. That gets, if it needs to be reprioritized or put at the top of the list for the next sprint, it will happen. So you have to figure out that balance between getting stuff done and making it work, but not doing that in big, lengthy ways that mean you're going to get it wrong. So you've got to manage the scope creep throughout. Then presumably at some point you reach like a real point of launch. And again, this is critical as entrepreneurs. You need to be launching at some point. So you've defined that, you've figured out in your roadmap kind of what amount of stuff is that kind of minimum viable product, and you're ready to launch because you've done an effective job through your sprints. But then that process still keeps going from there. You need to get into another iteration. It doesn't end. If you're going to have a successful business, product development never ends. You launch it, but you're launching it all the time. You continue to work on it. You continue to iterate. In our world, we also get into kind of maintenance mode because we kind of hand that off, and there's some level of maintenance that's happening. Again, I bring back this model all the time to show the building, the measuring, the learning that needs to happen throughout. So the iteration never stops. And like I said, maintenance, I almost don't want to talk about that here because I think it makes less sense when you're talking about a startup building a product. You're building your business around that product. You're never maintaining it. You're continuing to build on top of it. But there's kind of different ways to approach that stuff. So I'm pretty much done here, and I can move on to questions. I think the key conclusion here is that you have to understand the kind of qualities and responsibilities of the product manager, and I see it a lot as like herding sheep, keeping everybody aligned and kind of moving towards the same goals. That's the key job of the product manager, and that's the key element of product development. And there's so many different ways that you can do it. You've got to pick the one that works for you, your organization, your product, your market, whatever that might be. But there's principles that are really valuable to work on and use throughout that cycle. With that, I'm probably early, but is that about right for timing?
Yeah, we have about 10 minutes for questions. There are 2 microphones in the center aisle. We do ask that you use the mics so that people at the other end of the room can hear you, but also so our webcast participants can hear.
All right.
Thank you for the presentation. My startup is a service sector startup, consulting primarily in the food and natural resources sector. So I was listening to your presentation. One of the themes that I think you brought up a couple times is the speed of change in our society now with various products, digital products. Are there parallels that you would be able to recommend for the service sector, consulting sector in terms of ideas? Is it even faster? The scope of your development for a product, is it that much narrower compared to, let's say, consulting for management or a sector? So basically the parallels or comparisons that you might see in your experience.
Yeah, I've worked in services for years, and we are ultimately a service company, although we're building products. But a part of that is the strategy and the kind of the more management consulting piece that comes with it. And you still have to look at it in the same way. You still need to kind of put that lean canvas up there and understand what you're trying to solve and what your solution is. So you can call it a product. It's still a product at the end of the day that you sell, and you have a even probably a unique advantage in some ways, because if you do it well and you follow the process and you learn from your customers and from the market, then you really don't have a lot of waste along the way, because you don't have to build physical product, write lines of code and so on to get there. At the same time, it's more nebulous as well, right? So it's hard to know. But But I like the idea of kind of taking agile, taking lean, and using those in a service capacity as well. I think they're totally applicable. You just have to move fast. And I think the key thing is iteration always, and that iteration comes from learning from your customers in your market. Hi.
Hi there. I had a question about the build, measure, learn loop and how much time you spend through those. So, for example, in a measure phase, we'd allocated 2 weeks, and we'd gotten 12 data points or 12 customer conversations.
Right.
And the question was, should we allocate an extra week and maybe get an extra 5 customer data points, or just make a call and sort of evolve,
Yeah, it's pretty intertwined with your whole business, right? So part of that's going to be like also looking at like what's your burn rate, and by allocating an extra week to measure, what impact does that have on your burn rate for your business? But it also, you're going to have an instinctual component there that says, well, of the 12 data points I got, does it feel like it's diverse enough? It represents what I need it to represent. So it's a totally imperfect process in that sense. Like, you can't eliminate instinct and gut from any of this, from anything about entrepreneurship in my mind. That's a huge part of it. But I see that problem. In the early stages, it's often really difficult to get many data points because there's challenges of just getting stuff in front of people. So like using different techniques. One technique I see that's really effective that is don't build anything, but like run an AdWords campaign or buy Facebook ads and see how many people are clicking on keywords that you're and concepts you're putting together. That gives you amazing data, and there's nothing there. So there's creative ways to try and find those data points as well. And sometimes you can do that outside of that loop too, because it's not tied to the product development, right?
Okay. Maybe if I was asking the inverse, how do you know if you spent too long in any particular site?
When you're not learning anything anymore from the data points, ultimately, like if you're just kind of getting the same level of validation or invalidating, like ideally you want to invalidate things as quickly as possible, which almost seems the opposite. Ideally, you'd like to think you're validating and you're doing things right all along, but you're not, so you probably want to invalidate as quickly as possible.
We have a couple questions from our webcast participants, Chris.
Sure.
One is, how do you manage the risk that comes with iteration and testing if it forces you to redesign and to reproduce the product, and that is a costly process?
I think by doing that, you've managed the risk, is kind of my answer to it. The risk is not doing that, because you're going to get things wrong every step of the way. So if you don't iterate, you've just built twice as much, 3 times as much, 5 times as much, that now you have to rebuild and start from scratch. I've just seen that like so many times. Even people that kind of say they're following that process, they don't actually do it, and they build too much because, like I said, you start patting yourself on the back, like, what a great idea I've got. This is fantastic. Everybody's going to want this. It's amazing how that often isn't true. And you build a lot. So I mean, the early stages, I recommend managing risk by doing less building, like what you can do, like I said, running AdWord campaigns to test out interest, or building products that don't work by putting buttons in certain places to see if people will click them. Like, will someone click the buy button even if I haven't built the payment functionality yet? And people worry a lot about, this is the problem, it's like people get into the idea of stealth mode, like I can't tell anybody about my startup, and then once I put it out there, it's got to be beautiful, it's got to work perfectly. Like if you're talking again, I'm sorry if I'm so focused on kind of the online space, but there's just millions of people out there to test this stuff. So you can run tests, and you can change your name and change your product later. Like, you're not going to burn bridges that way. What you learn is way more important than who you piss off in the early days when they click that button and nothing works. So I always prioritize the learning over that kind of stuff, and I think that's how you manage the risk. The other stuff is paper prototyping, hitting the streets. Like, if you read lean startup stuff, it's all about getting out in the street and meeting your customers, and you can do that with paper prototypes, interviews. All of this stuff is just about speaking to your prospective clients and customers first.
Another question we had was, what's the name of the tool you mentioned about working through backlogs?
Trello, Trello. It can be used for, you can use it for like personal task management, but it's a good team tool as well, and it's pretty full featured now, so it's amazing what you get for free out there.
Thanks. One last question, and then we'll end. Which software is the best to manage product management?
Haven't found one. It's usually a collection of, I find it's more a collection of tools and finding the tools that work. So when you try, anybody that tries to accomplish this with one tool, in my experience, has failed because it's such a individualized, or at least kind of organizationally focused or market focused thing. Like I said, everybody's got their own process. So in TWG's case, we've used a million different tools. We've ultimately built our own tool called Almost Scrum. So we follow Scrum, but it's not, it's our version of Scrum. So everybody's got their own flavor. Not always a good idea to build your own tool, by the way, but eventually, if you've got the resources, it's kind of a good way to practice the trade as well. So I don't think there is one tool, but there's lots of different tools. Trello, Basecamp, Google Docs are great for that stuff. And then there's a host of others that do kind of little niches within the world of product management and roadmaps and backlogs. And there was someone that was getting up as you started your question. Do you still have a question?
I was just curious, you may not be able to answer this one, but I was wondering, would you be able to ballpark a timeline and costs associated with developing a digital application? Like, I know it's a bit of a stretch, but.
Yeah, I can give you like a massive range. I say these days, like, it depends on cost. So like, think of your own personal costs. Like, you can't do anything for, it's like $50,000 to start if you factor in like the true cost of stuff to get like the most basic version of anything out there, and it goes up to a couple $1 million. It's a huge range. Tricky to say for sure.
All right. Thank you very much,
All
Chris.
right.
Have a
Thanks
good
for
evening,
having me.
everyone.